We're rolling.
All right. There's a couple ways we can approach that story, but.
Okay, yeah. Uh-oh. What the hell was that?
Test.
I think we're good.
All right.
Let's hope we're good.
All right.
Okay. All right. So,
Yeah.
So the tooth.
Yeah. So, you tell me if this is a long story or a headache, right? But the long story short, I'm missing a tooth.
Okay.
And I suddenly have a lisp I'm learning to speak with. So as I talk to you today, I'm certainly, I'm working on managing that now that I'm missing a front tooth. The tooth was injured in 1990. And the mechanism of injury is a bigger story. And you can tell me if you think you want to go into that.
I do.
But it's pretty formative, actually. And you might find it interesting.
And for our listeners, just so you know, like, you can't see Bill's big, gap tooth smile, but he's missing one of his front teeth right here. And there was a post on Facebook.
Oh, so you saw the post.
And so that's what originally you texted me about it afterwards, but I saw the post and I was just like, oh my God, I can't wait to hear this story.
Right. And so the mustache was a little bit of a joke that had kind of run long, and then the tooth came out, and it just goes all too well with the mustache missing. So now I'm keeping the mustache and the tooth missing.
Absolutely.
So the original injury to the tooth was in 1990, and that could become a long story. But then subsequent to that, there was a root canal, then a crown number 1, and then about 2 years ago, crown number 2. And at that time, the dentist that did that crown, I wasn't happy with that in total, and moved away from that dentist to a new dentist. She's wonderful. And then a few days ago, I bit into a hamburger, and the what's left of that tooth broke off at the gum line. So that's
Did that hurt?
So it when the original injury hurt tremendously, but no, at this point, believe it or not, it was the sound. I'm like, what just happened? Because this incredible sound of like dry wood breaking, and anyway, just quickly realized, oh shoot, my tooth just, and it took about 30 seconds to put it all together
to figure out what was going
and then
on,
I fished the tooth out of the hamburger in my mouth, and that was that. But the
I want to hear the original story.
Yeah.
So the Facebook version, all it said was you and a buddy got jumped when you were kids or something.
Yeah. So it's a crazy story, and if anybody's listening that grew up around a similar age as us, in Clifton Park,
mid-40s, everyone.
Yeah. For me,
40s.
technically, it's really late. Yeah, but anybody that grew up in Clifton Park remembers probably some version or some part of this. And if you're a mom of a kid at the time that was my age, that's now our age, the moms all remember this unbelievably, and it's come up my entire life. Yeah. So long story short, Mike, the kid that lived across the street from me, came over to my house one evening, and this is 1990, and 1990, and he's like, "Hey, Bill, I want to run up to Price Chopper to get batteries for my Walkman for the field trip tomorrow."
Okay.
I don't know, it's like a bus trip to Boston or something, and so we jumped on our bicycles and started pedaling up to Price Chopper. And a car went by, and I was like always a car guy, so I took note. It was a Chevy Nova at the time.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of like older kids in the car, and one of them was on the passenger side, sitting on the windowsill out of the car, like reaching over the roof, like yelling at us. And I just remember looking at Mike, being like, WTF kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't pay him any mind really at that time, but they were just like, kids, misbehaving. Turns out, fast forward, I'll get there, but back then it was just like, kids being kids. 10 years ago, we'd call those same kids bullies.
Yeah.
Today, we'd call them violent criminals.
Right.
So it's funny how times change.
Yeah.
So anyway, as we're riding our bicycles down towards Price Chopper, it's pretty much dusk/dark at this point, and unknowns to us until it unfolded. That car pulled into a Pay and Spray car wash and kind of dipped out of sight. And two of the kids in the car filled up a 5-gallon pail with water and thought they were going to ambush us on a cold night and get us wet with this 5-gallon pail of water. But as you probably realize, running around a farm, 5 gallons is about 40 pounds. And when you hit a kid with 40 pounds on a bicycle, it knocks him off the bicycle. And when you do that to Mike, my neighbor, it knocks him off his bicycle into me, and it knocks me into the road to get hit head on by a oncoming station.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's how the original injury occurred. And then the story goes on from there. So like I said, anybody that's listening that remembers that will remember some of the other details as well. It's probably a whole separate episode, but
that's crazy.
It's a crazy story. And like I said, and we could talk for a while about the subsequent details after that, but perhaps tied to what we're talking about, a pretty formative experience for a kid in ninth grade to be a victim of an assault or violent crime. And and I will say at the time there was there was so many things to take away from that from a formative standpoint, but one of which that you'll laugh about to today is that I'm careful with what I believe in the media, because even at that time, nobody wrote a story in the Times Useless or the Gazette, whatever they were at the time. Nobody wrote a story that was true to fact. So, and some of them went so far to just dig up little snippets of stuff and then build their own story from it. Crazy stuff. So that was a kind of an
to make it more sensational.
To way more sensational. Yeah.
I've actually had that over the years. My 47 years, I've had that. There's been 2 times that I've had things in my life that were a little crazy, and there was press about it. And both times they were inflated, grossly inflated, to make them sound like it was unbelievable. Like, and really, it was just in one case, just a dumb kid doing dumb things, like the kid throwing the bucket of water, right? Just being a dumb kid pulling a prank was probably really what he was trying to be. But then all of a sudden, it's a checkered past of blah, blah, and it becomes all this stuff. And then another case where I just happened to own a property, something went down at that property. And next thing you know, like the press was making me out, just because I own the property, making me out to be this like thing. And I was like, well, all right, time out. Like, I'm a dad, I'm a business person. Like, it's crazy.
It is.
It's absolutely crazy, but some media outlets will do. And to your point, like why a lot of traditional media and legacy media outlets they have no credibility anymore.
No, none. Yeah. And I mean, this is going back to 1990, right?
Yeah.
So as a kid seeing this, and yeah. So crazy. Anyway, a bunch of lessons that come out of that. It is. It's a pretty crazy story. That's obviously the ultra short version of it.
Yeah. But, Head On by Station Wagon.
Yeah.
I promise folks we're going to talk about the other stuff, but
So I was on a bicycle, like a BMX bicycle, if you will, for visual. My shin hit the bumper, my right knee hit the headlight, and my chin hit the A-pillar, which supports the windshield, of course. That's the metal on the side of the windshield. So I got pretty screwed up, pretty banged up from it.
Yeah, your poor parents must have been sick.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's where, like I said, be careful because the story could go long, but my father has been involved in EMS for a long time. I mean, his EMT number for the state of New York is like 0054 or something.
Yeah.
Like, absurd. Like he was the 54th EMT. And I'm generalizing. Point being, though, is he's been in that for a long time. And as you can imagine, and we were talking about wilderness first aid training and stuff, I think, before we started. But so I'd been around the first aid stuff with my dad as a result quite a bit. And as a kid back then, he'd get called out on ambulance calls and I'd be with him. So I'd wind up with him on the call, and so I'd be the one, the 10-year-old directing traffic or whatever, or holding something or whatever, running to the car for more equipment or whatever. So long story short, I've been around that with him and seen him in that quite a bit. And I was kind of lucid when it happened. And I remember Mike, the neighbor who I was with, I said, Mike, get help. And he ran to a Pizza Hut and phoned my dad. And then I don't even know if there was 911 then, but phoned the ambulance. And what brought me back to lucidness was the sound of my father's vehicle skidding to a stop to block traffic in where I was to protect me from traffic and to get out and start to render medical help to me. And he had a flashlight to examine me. When he shined his flashlight on my face, it went in the top of my chin and came out of my chest. My face was kind of blown. And
God, that's awful.
Yeah, so you speak about parents. The look on his face then was a look I'd never seen before or haven't seen since.
Yeah.
Since that
I can't even imagine.
He's delivered multiple babies. He's saved lives. I mean, his stories of his EMT hood are strong, and he's seen it all.
I can't believe it. Yeah. I could never be an EMT.
Yeah, it's a thing for
sure. Especially The adults and stuff like that would not bother me, but as soon as I had to work on a kid, man, I would not be able to do that.
Yeah, and apparently somebody you know well or care about. It's
no way.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, he probably was terrified.
Yeah. It was something else to say.
Wow.
Least. So yeah, so like I said, that's a story that would take on a life of its own, and we could probably burn down 30 minutes if we had it.
So we've got some sort of write error happening. All right, so we've got all sorts of audio devices now.
All right, round 2.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, everyone, if you're listening or watching, we had what seems to be a little technical difficulty. So the first part of the podcast, Bill talking about his tooth, might be from our camera audio and not this audio. So you might hear a little bit of a difference, but still able to hear it. So that's a crazy story.
It is, right? Yeah, and it makes me scratch my head quite often on kind of that nature nurture question. So.
Yeah.
Are some of the reasons I am who I am and I operate the way I operate as a result of that experience, or were they there before that experience? Right, hard to say, but there's definitely some carryovers to professional work as well, and the stuff that I do with problem solving and helping lead teams in the right direction. Geez, I wonder if part of it was because of some of the lessons learned and some of the things I've internalized from that. A buddy of mine joked recently when that post went up that you saw. He hit me up privately on just a text and said, "Hey, that's the kind of thing it takes an ayahuasca trip to, or that's the kind of trauma it takes an ayahuasca trip to recover from." So it's
that's funny.
Yeah, I never considered that, but I wonder these days if that would put a kid in therapy for years or whatever. I mean, who knows? But
I don't know, man. Yeah, I guess it really depends. It's such a weird thing, but I think about this more than I should probably. It's just about I know when we were growing up. It's just a really different time. And it was nothing for me at 7 or 8 years old to be basically out in the world without my parents.
Of course.
Shooting BB guns and bow and arrows and all these different things. And I literally I turned 7 and my dad gave me a bow and arrow and gave me a BB gun. It was go have fun.
Right.
No, here's how you do it kind of stuff.
I used to walk through the neighborhood with my pellet rifle to go hunting in the woods. Could you imagine today if a kid walked through the neighborhood with a pellet rifle?
No, there'd be freaking squad cars and SWAT teams showing up. That's what I mean. It's just such a different world. And I think about my kids, when all of my kids turned 7, I gave them BB guns. But it came with BB guns and safety lessons and how to carry the gun. I treated it like it was a firearm. You know what I mean? It wasn't just here you go, have fun. I mean, I remember me and my buddies used to run around the woods at Saranac Lake shooting each other with BB guns, having playing army, and with BB guns.
And they still both all have 2 eyes still.
I know, yeah. No, I never got hit in the face, man. And no safety goggles.
Of course,
it was we just had the rule, don't aim for the face. Right. That was the rule.
Can you imagine?
Oh my God, no, I can't imagine. That's what I think about my kids now, and I'm they would die. And if I think of half the situations that I was in as a kid, I just don't think they'd survive.
Yeah, we didn't even have helmets,
No, or the whole get nabbed thing. The amount of people that are nabbing kids off the street these days, and how frequent that is.
Yeah, and that's horrifying.
It's absolutely horrifying. Yeah. I can't even imagine, and just that whole thing. So I think about that stuff, and about maybe all of us need a little bit of ibogaine or ayahuasca or whatever, some plant-based medicines to
go figure it
get
out.
over our childhoods. Yeah. So let's actually I'm really excited to try that coffee out that you brought over.
Good, yeah. I'm glad I was able to show up a little.
I mean, listen, I drink chock full of nuts typically.
Yeah, hopefully
which
this
is also
step
very
up.
good. I'm sure it will be. I mean, let's be honest. Chock full of nuts is not great coffee.
I don't know, man. A friend of mine, they mix chock full of nuts 50-50 with Bustelo, and they swear that's the answer
that's
right
the
there.
Answer?
Yeah, and it's fractions of the price.
Oh my God. Man. You look at coffee's so damn expensive, and you get a big thing of chock full of nuts for $12.
Do you still get the can? That was the best part.
Oh yeah. And I got different size cans. I've got 800 of them around it because
you can't get rid of them.
No,
absolutely not. Yeah.
I was actually I had one of the big cans out the other day, and I was telling my daughter Avery that's what when I die, they're going to cremate, put my ashes in one of those chock full of nuts cans, and just put it up on the shelf for a couple of years.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
So, so let's talk about who you are and what you do.
Sure.
So, for those of you listening, we just kind of started talking. We didn't introduce you or anything like this. So, why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners who you are and what your business is?
Yeah, appreciate it. So, my name is Bill, and my business is the Operational Excellence Shop, or www.theopexshop.com. my focus is to help businesses overcome significant operational challenges. And this is where, and you've heard me say this before, but I wish I was a plumber, because somebody says, what do you do? And you say, I'm a plumber. And they, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Right? Yeah. But it was kind of a strange genesis, kind of how it became. But at the end of the day, the way that I operate is, it would be quick to say consultant, but it's not really a consultant. It's more of an interim COO, or Chief Operating Officer. And during that time that I'm engaged with an organization, I'm working on helping them pivot or find their way through a challenge. That challenge could be penetrating a new region. It could be overcoming a change in infrastructure, or a change in governance, or something that impact their margins, for example. It could be the desire to scale and grow and acquire another company, or maybe they acquired another company and they're having trouble integrating that company, right? It could be any number of things, any number of operational challenges. But where I draw the line is on the operation side. And in my mind, there's the commercial side of the business, which is sales and marketing, and certainly an area that you play in pretty regularly. And then there's the operational side of the business, which is turning the crank, making the sausage, whatever that is, whether it's a service or a product. So my work is most commonly focused exclusively on the operations side. And I usually come in over a period of time, help navigate through whatever the challenges that we identify. So we go through a formal process of, quote, defining a problem, which is a thing in itself. Once we've defined the problem, it's usually my charge to lead the business through solving that. And in doing so, I initially start out in a pretty forward-facing role in that. And as time goes on, I tend to fade to the back and let the rest of the leadership team, or the person we hired to be there permanently, or the person that I'm there helping, either way, I fade to the back and let that person come to the front, and then begin to operate within that new infrastructure, that new team that we put in place. So the engagements vary in time, but successful engagements for me with a client have been anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. And I'm proud to say, in the 3-year type engagements, just to be clear, we've solved the first problem within X number of months. And they said, hey, since we've done that, can we build momentum in this direction? Can you help with that kind of thing? And that turns into a longer term engagement. So yeah, it's kind of a funny way of operating, and it's not something that historically is available to what I would call the mid-sized company, the company under 100 million in revenue. So what I do is not commonly available. If you're a big company, Fortune 500, or even somewhere between 100 million and Fortune 500, you can pay a lot of money from a big four consultancy to come in and do some of the work I do, or a specialty consultancy to come in and do the work that I do. But I've made the choice to try and offer this to that 100 million or less. And it seems like the companies that find it most appealing are typically 6 to 10 mil up to like 90 mil. That seems to be the revenue range of the companies that I operate with. And I think
and those are gross revenues, right? And we're not talking about that's how much money the company's making. That's
just what it's gross. Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's interesting too, depending on the people that listen to this podcast. So that's gross revenue. That's what the company earns before anything is taken away from it, right? Exactly. And it seems as though, and this is a bit of a bold statement, but it seems as though the companies from 10, or like I said, the low end was 6. That's kind of a funny story, though, or not a funny story, but an interesting story. But typically 10 to like 90 million. Those companies seem to have a different professional presence or maturity than the companies that earn less revenue per year. And hey, I mean, you and I would love to have companies making 5 million in revenue a year. Maybe we do, right? That's a successful thing, and I'm not knocking it. It just seems like there's a more sophisticated, different clientele in that range that I'm talking about, and that's where my services tend to become appealing. And I think the return on investment is a more easier discussion to have with those guys. Yeah.
Why don't we bring people into understanding why you're qualified to do those things, right? Maybe give them a little bit of the background of who you are and what you've done before stepping into this.
So professionally, so academically and professionally, both, I suppose, right? Yeah. So my undergraduate's in mechanical engineering, and leaving that was what, in hindsight now, was the first third of my 3 careers. So yeah, if you will, I could break it into thirds at this point. So leaving engineering school, I was focused on the commercialization of new products or bringing new products to market on the technical side of organizations, obviously, as an engineer. And again, in hindsight now, excuse me, that's...
The cat's getting you?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, the old cat allergy.
The cat allergy.
Yeah, here at the
Sorry
farm.
About that.
The commercializing new products is almost identical to bringing an emerging company to market or entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to unpack that a little bit just to understand like what that means, commercializing a new product.
Yeah. So in my experience prior, it was in established companies. So we had a cash cow, we had a revenue generator, whatever that was, and we were trying to bring our next sustainable competitive advantage to market. We're trying to bring the next product or service to market. So when you're talking about physical products in a technical environment, it's a little different than a service. But at the end of the day, there's a couple key components. One key component is you have to separate technology development from new product commercialization.
Okay.
You can't mix the two. It's a longer story as to why. It's how we separate it. But at the end of the day, if you're going to bring a new product to market, the technology has to be proven, mature, and established and ready to go. So what do I mean by that? If we were bringing the microwave to market right now, and if that thing inside the microwave that creates the microwave energy wasn't reliable, didn't last for decades, wasn't financially viable, right? That would still be in the technology development cycle. We wouldn't want to even talk about bringing the microwave to market until that little core thing that makes the radiations working. So separating those two things is critical, number one. Number two, when you get into the new product commercialization life cycle, there's a series of phases that you go through that mature not only the product you're bringing to market, but the business around the product so it can deliver it and service the client successfully when it's launched. So you kind of walk through those phases. Those phases have subtly different names depending on which sector you're in, but ultimately the work is the same, where you start with a proof of concept, then you validate that, then you verify that, then you validate it, then you go into a pilot phase, and you go into production. So marching through those phases, each brings on another level of maturity in the product and the infrastructure around it for it to ultimately be successful when it comes to market. And that's where the parallels come in with bringing a company to market. Entrepreneurship's become super popular in like the last decade.
Yeah.
In my limited experience with entrepreneurship, the good ones, the ones that are successful, are following the same roadmap that all classic new product delivery follows, but they're doing it in the launch of their company and the associated product, not just a new product in an established company.
So give us that path one more time.
Yeah, so you start out with proof of concept,
Okay.
Which is what it sounds like. It's an idea. And you take that proof of concept and you go through a phase called verification.
Okay.
And then once you've successfully exited verification, you go into validation. And these are steps in increased maturity of the product, the ability to produce it, the ability to support it, the ability to sell it, market it, all of the things. And then once you've exited validation, now you go into pilot. And pilot is the first time when you'd really be bringing that to any kind of mass market. You might limit your pilot, but you're going to mass market. So anything before pilot, you're working with early adopters, lighthouse customers, partners, et cetera, to get voice of customer, to iterate, to make changes, to do all those things. But when you exit validation and you go into pilot, that's the first time that you're really bringing it to the market. And again, you may segment the market, but you're really bringing it to the market. And what that means is the people receiving that product have expectations of it performing, not expectations of it being a new idea or a development, right? And then you leave pilot and go into full production, which is, commercial launch, et cetera, of whatever that product is. So
that's interesting. I never thought about that from a process standpoint. And I was asking to have you say it again, because I was like thinking, we're just launching our time bank software.
Oh, right.
And so I was thinking, well, where are we in that phase, right? Like, because I didn't use those names as we've gone through, but like we created it. And then we used it for a year, and then we brought on beta testers, which I'm wondering, like, would beta testers be the pilot?
Now, typically beta would be before the pilot.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's where the lingo comes in. So there's verification and validation. There's alpha and beta. There's several different sets of lingo depending on which vertical you're in. But
So when we left beta and we went to what we're calling our soft launch, that was really our pilot then.
Right.
Yeah. So we actually started selling it to a small, and which is where we are right now as a stage, right? Is we're selling it to small number of companies. We're not blasting it out there with Google ads or any of those things.
Sure.
And we're actually, kind of, I don't want to say still on that beta side, but we are using this pilot to kind of further validate like the software and, what did we forget?
Sure.
Or what did we miss or what would make it easier? So like one of the things that we're actually doing right now is automating the sign-up process. So we came out of beta with it and we started selling it to people, but the onboard people was clunky. Right. So it was like, it wasn't an automated thing because we didn't want everybody signing up for it. Not that everybody would be, but we wanted to make sure we could control who our first users were and all those kinds of things. So it's been very clunky. So now though, as we're getting ready to leave that pilot stage into what was the last stage you called it?
Production.
So as we get ready to leave that pilot stage and we need to make sure that people can go to the website, learn about the software, and then if they want to sign up right then and there and start using the software.
So you're starting to mature the rest of the systems around your offering.
Okay.
What you're saying,
Yeah.
Right? So you're kind of stumbling through a similar track. Exactly.
Yeah, stumbling is definitely the word.
Yeah. Well, hey, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
If it's successful. But interestingly enough, and I'd have to have my LinkedIn open to point to the years, but this work was after my undergraduate, right? So I mean, this is like late 90s, right? And fast forward a few years ago, a guy launched a book, and the book was getting a lot of traction. So I was really curious what it was. I flipped it open and flipped through some pages. I'm like, man, if I was smart enough to have written a book about what I did back then, this is what this guy did. Like
That's what he was writing.
He was clearly exposed to the same systems and processes and way of executing that I'm talking about. And he took it and he titled it The Lean Startup. And he marketed it to startup organizations. I was like, man, solid gold. Like again, reading a book is one thing, implementing it and being successful is a whole nother story.
Oh, yeah.
But everything he wrote about was what we were doing and teaching and helping other people do back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And fast forward to, I don't even know when the book came out, but it was probably 2020 or something like that. He was smart enough to take it and put in a book, and I'm sure he's retired. And I'm still working.
Yeah, I don't know. From what I understand about books, they're not that, profitable. But
good. I'll tell myself that since I haven't written one yet.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying they don't make money, but most people I know that make money with books have 20 of them out there.
Yeah, and I think it's the speaking engagements and the other things that come from it. Right?
Yeah.
So that's new product commercialization or bringing new products to market, and that was the first third of my professional career. And during that time, a few things happened. One, I was sitting next to, I was an engineer, and I was in an engineering department. So I'm in the office, right? This is, again, this is in the 90s. So I'm sitting in an office and look at the guy next to me, and he's the smartest guy I've ever met. And look at the guy next to me over there, and he's the smartest guy I've ever met. And they're both disgruntled as hell. And I was, sitting to myself thinking, shit, I can't sit next to these guys the rest of my, I mean, they're awesome. I can learn from these people, but like just the social component of sitting next to, and these two people represent a whole population, right?
Right.
And so like of engineers in an office somewhere. Not all engineers, but to be clear, but unfortunately a lot. And I thought to myself, man, I can't sit next to these people the rest of my life at work.
Yeah.
Like this isn't going to work for me. So I begrudgingly went back and said, how do I transition from where I am to something else, as effectively as possible? And at the time, going back from my MBA was what kind of rose up as the opportunity to transition from engineering, off the engineering curve kind of, and onto the business curve, if you will, or leadership curve.
Yeah.
That's one thing that came out of that. The other thing that came out of that time was, so I did that. I went back to school at night, actually. Part of me wishes I did an executive MBA at the time, which was a contemplation, but I went at night. But either way, so the MBA came out of that. And then something else came out of that. And that was, I realized I was asked to turn around a couple companies that were having trouble delivering new products to market. And as I was doing that, it kind of dawned on me that the work I was doing to turn around this failure to deliver new products was work that I could apply to any other failure or problem or challenge. And that the success I was having and the way I was executing was just more broadly applicable. So the MBA combined with that learning, and I had also at that time priceless learning through an incredible mentor. So again, I'll spare you the long story, but a fellow named Roger He took over the leadership of a startup company that I was part of at the time. And again, long story short, I kind of stuck my neck out unknowingly at the time. I get more of kind of a stupid young kid. Like, kind of opened my mouth. And Roger kind of called me out on it. Again, a longer story. And then next thing you know, kind of got pulled under his wing and became his right-hand man. And he opened up his network to me and a number of other opportunities to learn and to grow as a professional. So, so those three things are what kind of catapulted me into phase two. The other thing too, not sure if the audio will come through, but we talked about how the tooth was originally injured.
Yeah.
So coming off of that experience, one of the things that I vowed to myself personally was to never, ever be a victim again or allow anybody in my presence to be a victim. And that is a pledge I made to myself that I kept quiet for a long time, but I talk a little bit more about now because I think there's value in sharing that with other people. Maybe it's inspirational, maybe not, but either way, there's value. When I met Roger, he had a very similar motto. He was an orphan, actually, and went to become this incredible professional success that books were written about. And he's since written books and just an incredible, incredible person. So his commitment to being self-deterministic and never being a victim was something personally that resonated with me from my experience as well. And I think was probably an undertone in our relationship that he maybe saw in me as well. And as a result, took me under his wing to grow.
Yeah.
So that's kind of exiting that phase, the new product commercialization phase, and then rolling into the helping businesses navigate through significant challenges. So that was kind of the middle phase or the second phase of my career. In essence, part of that time, I almost worked as an internal consultant for a large organization, basically. It was kind of a weird genesis of how that happened or how that came to be. But at the end of the day, I was working inside a Fortune 50 company and kept getting pulled in to help them solve different problems. These were problems from the financial side of the organization, for example. And again, I'd have to look at my LinkedIn, but I don't remember the specific numbers, but let's just say you had 20 million in outstanding money that needed to be collected. So the business basically had a $20 million line of credit out to several clients of them because they just couldn't get out of the blocks and bill these people on time and get the money. And we're getting near year end. And it's a publicly traded company, so they want that 20 million on the books, not out as a liability or what have you. So I was charged with pulling that money in as one of the problems. Another problem that needed to be solved for that company was it was a U.S. and German-centric operation, and they decided they wanted to go over, quote, rest of world. So they...
World domination.
Yeah, right. So big business stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I was charged with figuring out how to enable guys in India that show up to a construction site in flip-flops to install these big pieces of equipment with the same level of excellence as a German craftsman or an American redneck.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the second phase of my career was working inside the largest of large, Fortune 50 American companies, helping them solve various problems. And all during that time, I had made a commitment. Well, if I rewind back to meeting Roger, he asked me kind of what did I want to do when I grew up. And I told him I needed to run part of his business so that I'd be prepared to run my own someday. Basically, that was what I told him at the time. That first day that I was in his office, I met, which again is a longer story in itself. And then I kind of called myself on that years later, and I was kind of coasting, working for a big company. The work was really pretty easy for me because of some of the experiences I'd had and what have you. And I was chasing some things personally at the time, which I was, as you know, I was semi-pro racing motor, or semi-pro is the best way to sum it up, racing motorcycles, road racing. So I was road racing, kind of doing my job relatively easy. Road racing took a lot of time to pursue. And I was kind of having fun and forgot about my professional goals. So I called myself on and said, hey, Bill, you told yourself that you were going to start your own company. And that kind of rolls into the third phase where I stepped out on my own and started HR Resolved. And during the time that we were starting HR Resolved, I actually collected a severance from one of those large companies. So that helped me through the first year of HR Resolved. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to replace my corporate salary, if you will, and how long it was going to take. So once I got done living off that severance, I needed to have some pretty accelerated growth in HR Resolved, or I needed to supplement someplace else. And And this was one of the times where it's a joke for me that Tansey luck, it's not very good, right? So that's a running joke among friends. But this was one of the times where that wasn't the case. But one of the larger local businesses who was around 90 million in revenue. And since I said that, I'll leave the name of the business out.
Yeah.
They wanted to grow to 100 million in revenue. And the founder and president of that business had known a little bit about what I was doing. Maybe he had connected with me on LinkedIn or had talked to Katie or something at the gym. We worked out at the same gym at the time, CrossFit at the time.
Yep.
And anyway, he reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to have lunch? I hear, you're on your own now, and I'd like to talk to you about a business system to enable my business to cross that 100 million mark. So we're prepped for acquisition. And he hired me to do what I'm doing now is the operational excellence shop, and that was the beginning of the OpEx shop. Yeah. So and at the time, I thought, hey, this will be good temporarily while we continue to grow HR Resolved and what have you. But at this point now, Katie's running HR Resolved for the most part, and with her team, and I'm still doing the OpEx shop work. It's a lot of fun, and it's again, it's this niche that just wasn't available to these mid-size, if you will, local companies. I work all over the country, but that said, a lot.
I was going to ask you that, because I know people. I don't think people realize the number of mid-size, what you refer to as mid-size, what most of us small guys would call large companies, right? Like I look at what my numbers are, and I think about 100 million. I'm like, holy moly, that sounds huge to me, right? There's more than people realize, though, of businesses that are of that size locally, like within a 50-mile radius of where we're sitting right now.
For sure. Yeah, and in alignment with your podcast. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and I think of local, and you can say 50-mile radius. I think of like New York City to Lake Placid because there's this I-87 corridor that runs up and down here. Yeah. Right? So to me, that's like literally the highway that connects this business.
Yeah, you can be there in a couple hours, right?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So, and there is quite a bit. Interestingly enough, other regions though have more, and this has been an interesting kind of this observation, I guess, of my own. New York City to Lake Placid is different than Boston to Maine.
Sure.
Boston, forgive me if you like Boston, but it's not a real city. It's not New York City. It's not Tokyo. It's not Singapore.
Well, it's pretty small comparatively.
Really small.
Yeah.
And everybody in Boston, their end goal is to kind of get out of Boston and go north. That's different in New York City, man.
Yeah.
New York City, their goal is not to leave the city. That's the city, man. The only place they're leaving that for, like I said, is like a Tokyo or Singapore or Hong Kong.
Don't you feel like that's changed a little bit though since because of COVID and I mean we saw so many people come out of New York City that came up here and
True.
Again there's a big exodus that happened during all that and I forget
our buddy Neil, right?
Yeah.
I need to reach out to him.
Yeah. Neil's a good dude. But I feel like there's not to be argumentative, Bill, but I do feel like that that definitely was.
You're right.
Up until just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But now I feel like that's a little bit different, and now we're just in this weird place. Like I don't even know if that's still true or not. If people are still moving north, or if they're going back, or what's going on. But
yeah, that's a good point. And and actually challenging me like that, I appreciate that challenge. Now thinking about it, you're absolutely right. That said, the thing that still remains is different, I think, is that the people leaving Boston and heading as north as Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
It's that corridor through New Hampshire.
Yeah.
They're bringing their ideas and their businesses with them. A lot of those folks that we're talking about that left New York are digital nomads or working virtually or something like that, but haven't brought, at least in my experience, haven't brought a business, a 10 to 100
a large one.
business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there's still a difference, but you're absolutely right. It's culturally has changed this area, and the cross section of people has changed as well, for sure.
It's definitely driven the real estate values up as well because the demand for it just went through the roof with people moving up here. But
I wish it would drive it up more. As you know, I'd like to sell.
Oh man. It's crazy. Do you feel that? So back when I was in consulting, we always talked about the 80-mile rule, which was people always felt you were more credible if you didn't live next door to them, so to speak. Like, and we would run into that all the time where like people, and I've talked to other business coaches and consultants and where they're like, most of our clients are like an hour to 2 hours away. And locally, people do not look at our stuff because we're in their backyard. And for some reason, that means we don't have the credibility. But as soon as you're 80 miles away, like, oh, yeah, they're it's like you're a big deal.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
It's weird.
Yeah.
I still try to understand that. Like, why is that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you're absolutely not wrong.
So you do see that.
Yeah, for sure. It's and it manifests itself in a couple different ways. So it's and that's changed too. So again, I'd have to look at my LinkedIn, but it's been over a decade. So, whatever, 12, 13 years, something like that I've been doing what I've been doing in this third phase. I'm hoping the fourth phase is retirement, by the way, but I'm in the third phase.
When did you get bored?
Oh, there's a lot of fish to catch.
That's true.
I got a lot of hobbies.
That's what we're talking. Yeah.
So I still wake up early and I'd still work hard, but I get to choose what I want to do. To me, that's the idea. So you get to wake up and choose as opposed to wake up and do because you got to make some money.
Yeah.
But that's changed a little bit through COVID too, though. That idea of that 80-mile rule. So I feel like, so for example, over a decade ago, the idea of being virtual and having virtual meetings stuff was tough for a lot of people, right? So the idea of being local to them was really appealing. Where now, with the prominence of virtual work, that 80-mile rule really comes into play. Where I think they think, you're a little bit farther away, you're not in their backyard, so maybe you are an expert, and they're okay working virtually. So that kind of opens up some opportunities. So I think that in itself has pivoted a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know about you. I definitely prefer anything I can do in person these days. I so much prefer it. I still Zoom. I mean, we do this podcast via Zoom sometimes because,
cool.
You got 3-4 people in different places and you need to get them and you can't get them all in the room or they don't want to come out to the farm, which I totally understand.
Sure.
But it's, I'm just so over Zoom. I'm so over just not being connected to real humans and not having real conversations face to face and,
Totally.
I don't know.
Yeah. For my clients, it becomes a value proposition thing. So
to be in person?
Yeah, be in person versus not. So the cost of having me in person basically becomes a thing, right? So if I'm engaged, like I said, for 6 months to 3 years, the early part of that engagement starts with in-house time for sure, where I'm in-house with the team. But as the engagement matures, the value proposition just isn't there for the client to pay me to travel 1 or 2 days a week,
right?
Whatever that looks like, whether it's an hour's drive or whether it's a train ride to New York or whether it's jumping on a plane to Chicago, for example. As you can imagine, it's compensable time and it's opportunity cost for me if I don't bill for that travel time. Right. So that changes the value proposition. That changes the economics. So for me, for the most part, that decision's made for me by the economics of it for the client. So I do enjoy the time in-house and that's usually intensive time in-house, again, for economic reasons. And then after that, I'm pretty much reduced to virtual engagements with some exceptions for sure. Yeah. One of the things some clients have me do is something I call strategy deployment. It's actually based off a really well-studied and well-known technique called policy deployment. But when I say the word policy outside of that infrastructure or ecosystem, it doesn't make any sense. So strategy deployment is how I present it. So anyway, point being is strategy deployment is a annual exercise, and then every month there's a follow-up exercise till the next annual. So that's a perfect example of if I'm with a client for an extended period of time, for those annual events, again, I'll be back in-house every year for the annual events, but for the monthly follow-ups, they'll be virtual, for example. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just tough. You get so burnt out on Zoom. And I just feel like it's really hard to communicate via Zoom.
It's also, in my experience, it's really hard to be creative. And when we're solving problems, there's an element of creativity and learning and thinking and reacting and this kind of dynamic that happens, like a synergistic effect of the people being together working through the problem. And there's, Jamboard and there's all these other tools you can do on Zoom. But at the end of the day, it doesn't replace that synergy of being in-house. And there's a time and a place for it for sure. And, yeah. And that's, I think there's a social element and energy to that too that's really important in organizations that we maintain.
Yeah, from a culture standpoint.
Totally.
I know that we so August 1st, we went fully virtual. We had been a hybrid up to that point.
Okay.
And, we had, it's funny, post-COVID, we had done like this hybrid model and it failed miserably. So then we brought everyone in-house, 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 type deal. And I got to be honest with you. I don't want to be in the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And half the time I'm out in sales appointments or whatever it is and meeting with clients. So like, I didn't want to ask someone to do something that I wasn't willing to do. Sure. So then it was Monday through Thursday, right? I'm like, I don't want to go in the office on Friday. I'm like, I bet these guys would love a 3-day weekend every damn week. Sure. Right. And so then we gave an option like, hey, if you guys want to do your 40 hours Monday through Thursday, make it happen. You want to take Fridays off or you want to work some whatever, do it. And then it became, we were in the office Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then we were like, let's just try Monday, Tuesday. And then it went to, you know what, this is stupid. Now we're paying for office space that we're barely using. So we went to full hybrid. And what we found out within the first 30 days is we needed to be in the same room sometimes, not all the time. So then we spent the last, I don't know, few months getting together like once or twice a week for an hour or two. And what we found out is that's not enough either. And so I'm redoing the garage right now to have put the podcast studio out there and like have a little operations center so that when we do need to come together, we got a spot, you know, and then if these guys want to take a break and go for a walk around the farm, the pond, you know, like go pet the freaking goats or whatever, you know, like they can. So, but to your point though, right? Like there is a value add to being in person in a lot of scenarios. It doesn't have to be all the time. Totally. But you do need to be together at some point.
Your story is one that probably resonates with a lot of people listening, and it's something that I hear all the time. And interestingly enough, culture's super important, and there's a time to be together and solve problems together. There's that dynamic that you're talking about, and that's undeniable. And we can look way far back. Like think of sales organizations from years ago. You know, let's go back years and years ago. The sales organization was a field organization, but they were pulled in for an annual sales meeting, and then maybe halfway through the year there was a regional meeting, right? Not a national meeting, and then periodically their leader would go out and ride with them on sales calls. So if we look at maintaining a successful sales force as a remote workforce, they were always being pulled. There was always touch time. There was that scheduled time together. So that's irreplaceable, And in a small organization, small again, mid-sized, big, it's all relative. But in a small organization, that touch time also replaces business systems and ways of transacting. As the organization grows, or if the organization wants to grow, the need for a business system and some of that work that I do, it really comes into play and enables that virtual workforce to really perform effectively. Right. So, one of the common questions I get, well, how do I know if they're working? Well, if you have a business system, you know if they're working because they're producing results. And at the end of the day, if they're producing the measured result that you want to see, do you care if they're working 35 or 55? I don't think you do. And if they're hitting the goals, if they're doing what you need them to do, and if it's evident, then you're all good, So I mentioned doing strategy deployment as like a common engagement. Another common engagement is to come in and build out some of the underpinnings of a business system to enable everybody in the business to perform almost as well as the best guy or best person, right? So because that's another big question. It says, hey, we got this rock star over here, then we got kind of everybody else, and then we got this one loser that we're not sure if we should get, right? At the end of the day, with a mature business system, not only can that team work virtually, but you can raise the level of play almost as good as the good guy, almost across the board. There's always an anomaly. There's always that one person that needs to be managed, right? But you can raise that level of play and you can enable that growth.
That's interesting you say that. I definitely like the power of process. I think no matter what part of your business is, you need to have a process in place, period, right? And for so many reasons, but I think it's interesting that you say that of leveling up everyone so that they're performing close to the best person, because I don't know if it's E-Myth or Traction or whatever it is, but when they talk about process, they talk about building process to the lowest common denominator of intelligence and skill set, right? And that's always the approach I've been. It's like, all right, well, I need to build a process that, even a caveman could do, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Thanks, Geico.
Right. We assume this is our common discussion. We have to decide what level of incoming knowledge and capability and desire the people you're hiring have to have. And that's where, when you talk about a business system, it really is a system. So if we're putting the standard work in place, the processes, then we have to ask ourselves, do we have a standard organization, right? Is our organization design standard in a way that this role in the organization is responsible or owns this process or this standard work? And then as soon as we start asking ourselves that question, who's executing the standard work and where they are in the org, then we say, man, when we have to hire to fill this organization, what's the minimum standard we need to hire to so they can come in and be successful with the standard work, with the process, right? So when we talk about business system, that's where we start to talk about the interrelated components of it. And it's easy for it to become overwhelming for a lot of people. So when I get engaged, I commonly start wherever their problem is and start to kind of open the door and show them what could be. And then they start to ask questions. You say, oh, yeah, well, how we answer that is we incorporate this other component, right? And that's where, before you know it, we've polished up a bunch of different moving pieces. Yeah. And it's a fundamental game changer, Yeah,
the power of process. I talk about that with my team all the time. Like, guys, I'm like, you really need to think about what you're doing is, like, when we're working with an organization as their outsourced marketing department, what we're really doing is creating a marketing system for them that we are going to deploy for them. Exactly. And at some point in time, they're probably going to hire someone else to deploy for them. They, like, kind of like you, we work ourselves out of a job to some extent at some point in time. We may be there to help tweak and maybe do a little design work, but from an overall marketing, like, our job is to help companies grow to a point where they can afford their own in-house department.
Perfect.
And leave the outsourced solution. But and
you
can't do that without systems and processes.
Oh, 100%. And if you're doing it without it, it's just slower and it's new every time. It's never the same.
New every time.
You can't learn. You can't implement the learning.
You can't fix it when it breaks. It's I get really excited about this stuff, right? But I was telling my team, like, listen, I'm like, we've been building these different processes for different operational things in our business. And I'm like, listen, if we don't have a written down process with easy to understand steps, then every time something goes wrong, we have to start all over again, create a whole new process because we don't know where it broke.
Right.
But if we have steps that we're following every single time, then when something goes wrong, we can say, well, steps 1 and steps 2 went fine, but step 3 got all screwed up.
You got it.
So now we know where things are breaking and we can fix that piece and then move on about our business. Like,
100%.
It's amazing.
It is.
It's amazing. It's still hard as hell.
It is. And, and one of the it's funny because I hear you saying that. One of the challenges, unfortunately, is at this point, there's been a lot of businesses that have talked the talk, but not walked the walk. And as a result, there's a lot of employees, a lot of people out there who have been part of a business that's talked the talk. So their only experience is, oh, I've heard those words before and that didn't work.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, let's talk some more, right? And if sure enough, every damn time it comes down to a situation where a business kind of half tried something, dipped their toe in the water, adopted the language, but not the way of acting or leading, and it came up short. So that's one of the things that I'm actually commonly faced with is getting that initial momentum because sometimes people hear process and they pull back, or they hear standard work and they pull back, and it's legitimate because what I often say is I feel like the language has been polluted.
Sure.
So when I speak, I don't speak about lean, but the birth of what I do is 70% lean. Yeah. And where we go in the end of the day is truly lean. But that word has been thrown around so much and unfortunately has such a negative feel.
Well, now it kind of means like pared down, slimmed down.
And people use the word lean when they're talking about firing people. And if you look at lean, there's no getting rid of people in a lean transformation. There's none. Like
we're lean sizing? Is that what they
I don't know. But anyway, so it's you're 100% on the money. And the other thing I'll say too is two of the large companies. So there's 3 really large companies that I've worked for as a W-2 employee.
Sure.
And 2 of them approach this thing we're talking about completely from opposite ends of the spectrum. And interestingly enough, so it's General Electric and Danaher.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the former leader of Danaher is now leading General Electric.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I was with Danaher first, then I went to GE. So I brought my Danaher experience to GE, and I was like, what are these people doing, right? And GE is very incestuous. They have development and it's all great stuff, but they have development. So there's a lot of people in GE that came up through the GE school. They got out of a reputable university, then they went into the GE program, and you call them program kids. It's a 2-year rotational or 3-year program, and it's great because
it's a development system for your employees.
It is, and it indoctrinates you into GE. But me coming in with this other perspective, like that wasn't really popular, and it also, people in that were these classic GE folks, they saw Danaher and they're like, what's that? Well, fast forward, and the guy that used to run Danaher is now running GE, trying to get GE back on its feet. So kind of an interesting set of experiences to pull from. And the reason I mention that, though, is that in the olden days, GE used process and some of the things we're talking about. It became this self-fulfilling monster. And then they had this huge quality organization that was responsible for shaping the monster and keeping the monster running. Danaher didn't do that at all. Danaher, if you were a leader of a functional area, you had to have a certain level of expertise in the Danaher business system, and you had to own it for your area. So instead of this entire quality organization that was like the police and the pushback, no, you have to follow our rules. No, you were held to a different set of operating standards and a different measurement of success as a leader. And you had to check those boxes if you wanted to remain a leader in the business. And that involved...
See, I like that better. It gives you the freedom to be able to innovate and to be able to do things that if you're stuck in a system that's way too rigid, then you can't innovate. It's almost like...
It gets in its
not
own
to
way.
be political, but let's just look at like the U.S. and China, right? Like you can look at those two countries. China's super controlling of everything that happens, and it's one of the reasons why they're not as innovative as they could be in a lot of arenas because they're not given the freedom to be able to do that. Whereas in the U.S., we have all this innovation that goes on, and because we just have the freedom to be able to do that innovation.
You nailed it, man. I was in Asia doing a lot of business in Asia in the in the early 2000s. I had an office in India at one point. I was in and out of China and India, and it was an interesting time. And when I was first told I had to go there, my first thought was, I'm not taking American jobs. I mean, literally, that was my first. Like I probably fall more on the blue collar side than the white collar side. Even all the work I do is white collar. And at the end of the day, I realized that our guidance counselors are doing a disservice to our high school kids. They're not getting educations in the area that we need them to be educated in the U.S. to deliver the work we need delivered. Yeah. And kids in Asia, their guidance counselors or their government or whatever it is was directing them in the right way. However, when I started doing business in Asia, I came back and said one simple thing. I said, if those people could be creative and solve problems the way Westerners can, they would have conquered us 10 times over by now.
Yeah.
So they have the work ethic, they have the intelligence, they're being counseled to work in the areas that are emerging and that are needed. But fortunately for us, I guess you could say, they don't have the creativity or the problem solving. And that's what's enabled, the Western world, if you will, to continue to lead the charge when it comes to this stuff. So
Yeah, it's crazy. I think about that all the time actually with and similar vein, right? Like, wow, they would wipe the floor with us if they were given the freedom that we have over here to innovate and make mistakes and, fail and all, that whole mentality of failing forward.
Totally.
That's not something that...
Yeah, you're right. And the other thing I'll add to that, though, as part of the discussion is if they were given the freedom, it would still take years and years to change the culture. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Like we can't throw the switch, or they couldn't throw the switch tomorrow and just have the freedom and that solve the problem. Then the cultural change has to come. And that's an interesting part. So I mentioned that the work I do is part people and part transactional process. So how we transact, and the other half is how we align people to transact successfully. And that mentor I mentioned before, Roger, he had a significant impact on me as a leader and how I lead and how I develop culture and develop people. And there's an interesting phenomenon that you can't change a culture until the critical mass of the culture has reached sufficient dissatisfaction.
That's fair.
Yeah. And
is it bad enough yet, right? That's kind of the question, right? Is it bad enough for us to make the changes we need to make?
Yeah. And so it's interesting because political differences and viewpoints aside, in the last election, I got on the phone with my dad and he's heard me talk about this. I've talked to him. I have a good relationship with my father. We've talked a lot about this kind of stuff. I share with him what I do. And after the last election, I said, it's clear America hasn't reached sufficient dissatisfaction. After the most recent election, apparently America reached sufficient dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Right? So it's, again, whether you like it, whether you are a dissatisfied one or whether you're not a dissatisfied one, it's clear the critical mass has reached sufficient dissatisfaction based on the most recent outcome of the election. So,
well, it's like anything, right? If you're going to make real change, only comes when there's enough pain. Period.
Yeah.
If things are good, why would you change?
Totally.
So.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing as a leader. I was asked once, said, Bill, so you're telling me that as leaders, we're going to create sufficient dissatisfaction amongst the people? I'm like, that's exactly what I'm telling you. They said, well, how's that different than manipulation? And it was a great question. I was like, man, this is awesome. And jokingly, I was like, we got a verbal judo match right now, right?
Right.
But it was a great question, and it was one that I hadn't thought about before, but the answer was pretty clear, and it came out pretty quick. And I said, as leaders, we lead with positive intent. And if you're manipulative, you're leading with malice.
Okay.
And that's really the difference in the business, is that if you're creating sufficient dissatisfaction to help shepherd this group of people into something better, that's creating sufficient dissatisfaction, and it's leading with a positive intent, and it's much different than manipulating.
It's interesting you say that, because when I was doing sales training, a lot of what we did was using different forms of psychology, and whether that was transactional analysis or neurolinguistic programming. And we would always get the question of, well, isn't this manipulation? And my response was always, yes, it absolutely is. But, because there's a but there, manipulation is not always a bad thing, right? Like, I can manipulate this microphone. That's manipulating. It's movement, right? I'm changing it. I'm making a change with positive intent. And I do think that intent, and when it comes to manipulation, I do think that intent matters. But I think that almost all things, anytime there are two humans interacting, there is manipulation happening in some form, whether you realize it or not. True. You may be going into it thinking like, I need to make them do this thing I need them to do because it's blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that's bad. But manipulation has over time become such a term used with such a negative connotation that the good side of manipulation. So like, if I'm a football coach and I walk into that locker room and I start giving that pep talk, that is 1000% manipulation.
You bet.
Right? But I'm getting these kids motivated to go out there and win the football game and do the things they need to do. And it's with positive intent, but still manipulation. So it's whenever people bring up manipulation, I'm like, well, it's not always a bad thing. Manipulation's not a bad thing unless you're trying to do it for, ill means. So it's the end in mind, I guess. Right. But I don't know. That's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I don't mind manipulating people.
Yeah, I don't mind the verbal.
I mean, I'm a marketer, like it's all manipulation. It's figuring out messaging and figuring out, like, we're not trying to do anything that's bad, and we're not trying to hurt anyone. And we certainly approach every project and every problem. Yep. And that's, by the way, you've said the word problem solving 50 times in today's conversation. And I love it, because I just really view every single business on the planet solves a problem for someone. Otherwise, they would not have a business, right? Like, and it doesn't matter if you're selling a product or you're selling a service. At some point, people want that because they have a problem that they need solved, and that does it.
Exactly.
Right? And so it's we're solving problems, and one of those problems is we're helping people communicate in a fashion that identifies a problem someone has, and that here's the solution for that problem, right? And so a buddy of mine, Chris Connolly, years ago gave me the definition for marketing. He's like, the definition of marketing is identifying a specific group of people that have a specific set of problems, and they get you to think of them, or you get them to think of you as a solution, right? And that's the magic formula. And we've written stuff about it. I don't know who originally came. I don't know if that was Chris. I don't know if some other Gary V type guy out there but that's the definition of marketing that we follow. There's a target market. They have a specific set of problems. Our client has a product or a service that is going to solve that problem. Our job is to manipulate the messaging in a fashion that helps people understand that.
I love it.
Oh, I don't know.
I love it. It's funny that you picked it. I said problem solving 100 times. One of the things I'm curious and a little bit nervous about is playing back this podcast and seeing what words came out more than they should have. My wife jokes around all the time. I got torque and lubricity apparently are very popular in my vocabulary.
Well, I haven't heard torque or lubricity either of those words in this podcast, but I did hear problem solving a lot, because that's what you do. That's your business. You go in and you solve a problem for your clients. The problem that they have is they have a bunch of problems operationally, right? And I think that's the key, and it's one of the things that we try to do with this podcast is to help our listeners understand what problems other people out there are solving. Because someone may have the problem. Like there's 20 things that you talked about today. I'm just like, man, I wish I could afford Bill.
I appreciate that. That's nice.
I was like, man, no, I mean it. And I also happen to know you as a human. True. I know you to be a stand-up good dude. And I just know that your background, and one of my challenges with paying, whether it's a coach or a consultant or any of those things, is that most of them haven't done it. And I get that they read a book.
Yeah.
And this was actually why I left consulting, right? So, because when I was in sales consulting, I had no problem being a coach or a consultant with sales because I had done it for a decade and I was good at it.
Sure.
Right? I'm still good at it.
I am sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then I went and took the things that we were doing and some of the things that you're talking about and some of the things that I had learned in workshops and seminars and read in books. And I had created my solopreneur program, which was where we took small businesses. And this is, people that were under 5 employees. A lot of them were solopreneurs.
Yes.
And help them to develop sales process, operations process, marketing process, all these things. Right. And, but what it came down to was all of a sudden I found myself working with companies that were $10 million companies. One of them was a $100 million company. And I was just like, I'm not qualified to have these conversations with people because I haven't done this.
Yeah. Interesting you say that.
Like I know I have the theory.
Yep.
But that's all it is. I've never done it. But whereas you have done what you're talking about for very large organizations.
And I love the awareness. That's consistent with your character, but I love the awareness of that. It's funny because as an introvert, it's difficult for me to go to like networking groups. And then when I go to these networking groups, I hear people talk and their stories and what they reference are Elon Musk or a book. And I'm dying to raise my hand and say, oh, how do you know Elon? But instead I go to LinkedIn. There's no way they know Elon. They didn't work with Elon. And I got to admit, it's a little frustrating for me sometimes because they're pretty smooth talkers. They're better marketers, what have you, better salespeople. But I just kind of sit back quiet. But I think that's something that I'm really proud of is that the work that I bring forward is stuff that I've fallen down, scraped my knees on already under the mentorship of really amazing professionals in really amazing companies or parts of companies. And I've been able to take all of that and package it in a way that it seems to be really beneficial and really digestible by these mid-size organizations. So it's fun. The other thing I'll say too is you mentioned problem solving. The fun part for me, there's that lisp with the missing tooth.
It's so funny.
The fun part for me is winning with a team. So we're talking about leadership and manipulation and influence and that kind of thing. For me, the most fun is when the group of people that I'm leading, the light bulbs start coming on and they start playing at the next level. And then you see that they feel good, that they're playing up a level. Yeah. And to me, that's the thing that's fun. I mean, loud and clear, if I had my choice, I'd spend my days skiing or doing something else. Sure. But as long as I have to make a living, it's a tremendous amount of fun to win with a team. And what I'm doing right now enables me to solve that problem, and that enables me to win with the team and see the team succeed. And that's cool. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep you here all day, so I think that's a great note to go out on.
Cool.
Let's tell people where they can find you if they're interested more, and should be. It's social, website, where can they find you?
Yeah, appreciate it. I'm pretty low key social, but LinkedIn, William Tansey Jr., Bill, of course. But LinkedIn, you can find me. The OpEx, that's OPEX shop.com is the website. Thanks to you and your team for supporting me with the website. So the OpExShop.com or Bill Tansey on LinkedIn, William Tansey on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly at bill@theopexshop.com.
It's awesome.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Thanks for coming out to the farm, man.
It was a lot of fun.
I love it when people come out here.
This is my first time. I'm a little anxious to see how it goes, but I like it.
I think it was great, man.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.